Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 86. Have you seen my son? For the first time since he'd nearly gotten his brains blown out, Shota had arrived at their meeting location before Ivy. At first, he was happy about that. He thought that perhaps they were finally calming down about the whole ordeal. It hadn't escaped his notice that the kid didn't let him out of their sight for more than a few minutes at a time ever since the incident. But as the minutes ticked by, he was becoming increasingly concerned. Ivy was never late. Well, that's not true. They had been late once, but that was because they had run into an incident on their way to meet him. He sat there, picking at his dinner for 5 minutes before he texted them. Eraserhead, 10:35 p.m. You're late. The last time this happened, they had responded pretty quickly explaining the situation. So when another 7 minutes passed by with no response, he texted again. Eraserhead, 10:42 p.m. Where are you? At this point, he had put the lid back on his bento, not even trying to pretend he was still eating. They didn't usually meet on Sundays, not since Ivy's day job or whatever the hell they were doing picked up. But they had this Sunday planned for a while now, so that they could throw off anyone who had been watching their patrol schedules too closely. He was only here because of Ivy's belligerent insistence. It didn't seem likely that they would have forgotten, but that was his last remaining hope that something hadn't gone horribly wrong. As nonchalant and seemingly irresponsible as they were, Shota knew them well enough to know that they were too fastidious to forget things like this. Eraserhead, 10:45 p.m. Did you forget we were meeting tonight? He texted for a third time after they had officially been late for 15 minutes. He knew in his gut that he wasn't going to get a response, but he sat there for another 5 minutes, anxiously hoping. Maybe they fell asleep after work. That was possible. They could be perfectly fine. He almost laughed at the thought. This was Ivy. Of course they weren't perfectly fine. They got into far too much trouble to be perfectly fine. Letting himself think that the falling asleep after work theory was plausible, he called them a few times, hoping that a continuous buzzing would be enough to wake them up, assuming they were just sleeping, and that their phone was nearby and not on silent. Unsurprisingly, they did not pick up. He sent off one more text before jumping off the rooftop, setting out to find the kid himself. Eraserhead, 10:58 p.m. If you got yourself killed, I'm going to kill you. His first instinct was to ask around. That's what you did when someone went missing, after all. But he quickly discarded that idea. If Ivy was really missing, he shouldn't be alerting the city about it. He might as well just put out a memo saying, half the district's defenses are down. Go buck wild, criminals! That's exactly what they were trying to avoid with these intermittent Sunday patrols anyway. So, despite his better judgment, he headed to the only place he'd ever seen Ivy outside of patrol. The warehouse was just as dilapidated as he remembered. The only difference he could see was that there was a stack of 3 bricks beside the dumpster where they had found that cat. His heart lurched at the sight. He desperately hoped that the kid hadn't lied to him and that he wasn't about to walk into that staircase and find a dingy little camp. As he stepped through the hole in the wall that he had entered last time, he noticed the makeshift pallet turned target was no longer there. That was a good sign for Ivy's current living conditions, but a bad sign for actually finding them. Pressing ahead, he approached the door to the staircase. There was still a little bit of cloth hanging behind the makeshift cat door, cut out of the bottom, so he knocked. No response. He knocked again. Nothing. Tentatively, he opened the door. It was just as dark as he'd remembered. Darker, actually, because of the overcast sky blocking a good amount of the moonlight. Ivy, he called down just in case they'd heard the knocks and assumed it was the building settling. His call was met with silence, so he pulled his flashlight out from his pocket. He hesitated for a moment, his mind flashing back to what he had almost walked into the last time he had been here. He didn't want to see that. The mere thought of it had kept him up at night more than he'd ever admit to. He didn't smell anything that would indicate that something like that had happened. So, taking a deep breath, he clicked on the flashlight. It didn't illuminate very far. He could see the steps in front of him, and he could faintly tell where they ended, but he couldn't see anything with any amount of detail. He started taking the steps down, testing each one before he put his full weight on it, but they held steady. As he got closer to the middle landing, he could see that it was empty, save for something on the ground in the far corner. He went over to inspect it, and he felt his heart twist again painfully. It was a white blonde cat plush with gold eyes. Shota never got a good look at the actual cat, but he knew its fur was light and fluffy, just like this plush. With a sigh, he set the thing back down. It wasn't his to mess with. Looking back up, he noticed a pattern on the walls. Painted strands of ivy bordered the whole landing, and there were strips of tape half hanging off the walls like something had once been hanging there. The painted leaves looked amateurish in some places, but pretty well executed in others, like the painter had learned what they were doing halfway through the process. He wished he had Ivy's flashlight right now so he could get a proper look at the whole mural. That thing was blindingly bright, which Shota supposed would have been pretty helpful if they had lived in a place like this. Kami, how long had they lived here? This mural would have taken ages to complete. Shaking the question from his mind, he continued down the second set of stairs. The bottom landing was even more barren than the first. There was nothing here except random detritus and small puddles of water. Even so, he checked around the corner to the very back of the stairs. No matter how unlikely it was, he knew Ivy was small enough to fit down there. Both thankfully and unthankfully, he found nothing. Opening the door at the bottom of the staircase took some effort, but he eventually got it to creak open. The smell that met his nostrils had him sincerely hoping to not find Ivy here. The lower level had stagnant water covering most of the floor that he could see, and it smelled like a bog because of that. He wrapped his capture scarf around his nose and mouth because he didn't trust any of the mold and algae to not be toxic. He searched the place thoroughly, but there were no signs that anyone had been here in quite some time. Equally relieved and disappointed, he made his way back outside. Shota had no clue where to go from here. He called Ivy a few more times just to do something with his restless hands, but they didn't pick up. What was he supposed to do now? Just wander around aimlessly and hope for the best? With a resigned sigh, he headed back to their meeting location on the off chance that Ivy was actually just late and maybe lost their phone or something. As expected, the rooftop was as barren as he had left it. Damn it. Taking his phone out of his pocket, he called the detective. Eraser? He picked up on the first ring, sounding concerned because Shota rarely called him if something hadn't gone wrong. I need you to check local reports in the last 24 hours for anyone matching Ivy's description, he ordered without preamble. Shota could hear him clicking away at a keyboard before he responded. Matching Ivy's description? What do you mean matching Ivy's description? What description? Short? What's going on? Approximately 5'6", green eyes, dark hair. He trailed off. They really didn't have much to go on. What kind of report? Can you just tell me what's going on? I don't know. They didn't show up at our rendezvous and they aren't answering their phone, he admitted. Look for assault and battery reports or, I don't know, just anything. Have the police been called anywhere in Uptown? He asked, doing his best to not sound like he was pleading. He heard Tsukauchi clicking at the keyboard again and waited as patiently as he could. A dozen or so calls in the last 24 hours. None of them report anyone matching Ivy's description, and none of them would explain a missing person. It's mostly muggings and stuff like that. Nothing overly violent, he reported after a few minutes of tense silence. Now Amasa heard a colorful string of curses from the other side of the line in response to his report. Aizawa sounded more strung out than he'd ever heard him, and he'd reported some pretty grisly shit before. When and where did you last see them? Are there any locals who might know more about them? Have you asked around? He asked. No, I haven't asked around. All hell would break loose if word got out that Ivy was missing. Aizawa snapped back at him. Do they have usual haunts? Where have you checked so far? The line was quiet for a beat after that, but eventually Aizawa responded, I checked their former residence. He said hesitantly, they weren't there, and there's no sign that anyone has been there for quite some time. I have no other leads as to where they could be. Former residence? Why did Ivy tell him where they lived? That seemed wildly out of character. But then again, he didn't know Ivy like Eraser did. What do you want to do? Do you need feet on the ground? No. Aizawa cut him off before he could even offer to help. No offense, but you look like a cop. The best case scenario is you get kicked out of town. You shouldn't come around here, especially not without backup. Now Masa did his best to focus on the fact that Aizawa cared about his well-being and not on the fact that he thought he would get his ass beat if he showed his face in those streets. All right. There's no locals you trust enough to keep their mouths shut? I know most of them wouldn't tell me shit about Ivy when I went asking. There's got to be a few people, right? Yeah, there maybe. I have someone in mind. I'll let you know if I can find them and if they have any information. Aizawa responded after a moment of contemplation. Now Masa didn't have a chance to reply before the line went dead. All right. Worried Aizawa was much more of an a-hole than regular Aizawa. He sat there at his desk, tapping his fingers anxiously before deciding that he couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Grabbing his keys and his coat, he set out toward Uptown. He could drive around and keep an eye out at the very least. It only took Shota 20 minutes to find Iwai. She was standing out on one of her usual corners with a couple other women. Iwai, a word? He asked as he approached the group. He got several raised eyebrows in response to that, but he ignored them readily as he guided her to a nearby alley out of earshot from the rest of them. I must say, Eraser, I never took you for the type, she said flirtatiously as he checked the surrounding area to make sure they were alone. No, definitely not the type, he corrected as she walked closer to him. What a shame, she pouted, but backed off all the same. What do you need then? Subtlety, for one. I have questions, but I need you to keep this to yourself. Got it? I can be subtle. Depends on what it's about, though, she replied, and after a moment she added, Where's Ivy? Thought you two were joined at the hip. That's what it's about. I don't know where they are, he admitted after checking again to make sure no one was hiding within earshot. I was hoping you might have seen them or might be able to point me in the right direction. EY's eyebrows shot up in shock. What? You saying they're missing? She asked under her breath. Well, at least she seemed equally motivated to keep this a secret. I don't know. We were scheduled to meet tonight, but they never showed up. When's the last time you saw them? Eraser asked. Last time I saw them was last time I saw you. Like I said, thought you two were joined at the hip. Do you think they're in trouble? She asked tentatively. She watched Eraser's face fall in response. It was subtle, but given that his usual range of emotion was absolutely nothing, he may as well have been sobbing. I don't know. I don't know anything, he huffed out as he pulled a pad of paper from his pocket. He reached in another pocket, but pulled his hand back with nothing and started cursing under his breath. What? What's going on? She asked, actually starting to get a bit frightened. Nothing. Kid keeps stealing my damn pens, he responded softly. Eli couldn't help but laugh at that. Ivy was a little shit, so that didn't surprise her. You have your phone on you? Eraser asked after returning the pad of paper to his pocket. Yeah, she replied, still chuckling to herself as she dug around her purse and handed it over without hesitation. I'm giving you my number. Please do not share it, and let me know if you hear anything from them, he said as he tapped at the screen of her phone. You sure you're not coming on to me? She asked, trying to lighten the mood. He fixed his usual dead-eye stare on her as he returned her phone. Positive, he stated bluntly. Oh, you really know how to charm a gal, Eraserhead, she shot back in mock offense. Ivy's gonna be all right. They're tough. You know that, she added sincerely. He didn't look so convinced by that, but she had seen her fair share of the horrible things that happened in this city, and she had seen how the frequency of that type of thing had plummeted ever since Ivy, and by extension Eraserhead, had come to town. She knew they were much stronger together, but she also knew that Ivy on their own was nothing to sneeze at, and they were far too stubborn to go down without a fight. Quit moping and have some damn faith in them, she chastised and hit Eraser across the shoulder with her bag, none too gently. He made a face at her, but recovered quickly, sending her a far more determined nod before turning on his heel and scaling the alley wall in a matter of seconds. She hoped for both of their sakes that Ivy was okay. Shota was getting a whole lot of nowhere as he threw himself around the city. He couldn't really think of a single plausible reason for Ivy to go missing in action that didn't involve them being dead or gravely injured. Standing on the tallest roof in the city, looking out around himself, he was about to bite the bullet and deal with the endless teasing he would get if he called in for another favor from Nem and Zashi when, blessedly, he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He almost fumbled it over the side of the roof because he went to check it so fast. Ivy, sorry, I'm fine. He let out the biggest sigh of relief that he could and sat down heavily on the roof with his back against the ledge before responding. Eraserhead, what the hell happened? They might still be in trouble. They would be the type of person to say sorry with 3 exclamation points and insist they're fine before adding that they were also being held hostage or some shit like that. Ivy, long story, might be out for a while. Great. That explained nothing. Very helpful, Ivy. Eraserhead, are you okay? Ivy, yes, I'm fine. Eraserhead, your definition of fine or actually fine? He had to wait a little bit longer for the next response, which didn't help his only partially relieved anxiety. Ivy, family emergency. I'm fine. Oh, fat chance. That's the excuse they used last time they took a random 6-day sabbatical and came back hiding an injury with a concerning degree of skill. He knew he wasn't going to get answers if he asked, so he didn't bother. Eraserhead, let me know if you need anything. I won't ask questions. He waited for a response for a few minutes, but never got one, so he figured he should probably inform Tsukauchi. Aizawa, Ivy got back to me. They're allegedly fine. He should go home. It was enough to throw off anyone's perception of their patrol schedule for him to have been seen running around, and he was tired. An hour and a half of panic cardio will do that, he supposed. He needed tea and sleep, and maybe a cat or two. Now Masa felt the tension in his shoulders drop when he saw his phone screen light up with a notification from Ivy. He'll admit he had been worried, but in his defense, hearing a notoriously calm person like Eraser sounding panicked would be enough to heighten anyone's anxiety. He pulled over in a secluded parking lot by the beach to respond. Tsukauchi, 11:14 p.m. Ivy, where are you? Tsukauchi, 11:16 p.m. Eraser's gonna lose it. Ivy, 12:17 a.m. I'm fine. Family emergency. I already talked to him. Tsukauchi, 12:18 a.m. All right. Good to know. Hope everything is resolved soon. Jiminy crickets, that kid was going to age both of them. He was about to head back to the precinct when he got another text. Aizawa, 12:20 a.m. Ivy got back to me. They're allegedly fine. Allegedly fine? Tsukauchi, 12:20 a.m. Yeah, I heard. They texted me back too. Why do you say allegedly fine? Aizawa, 12:21 a.m. A hunch. They're never fine. That was troubling. He wanted to ask what he meant by that, but that didn't really seem like his business, nor was it the type of conversation he felt like having over text. Plus, he'd already spent over an hour driving around trying to find Ivy. He had been checking his email periodically and responding when necessary, but he was just hoping no one was going to drill him on what the heck he was doing when he got back, so now wasn't the time to push his luck. Tsukauchi, 12:22 a.m. Right. Let me know if you find anything out. That kid was going to give him gray hairs. End of chapter.